All right, so we are going to continue discussing where we come from and looking at the SBC and how it got formed. And we're moving into the 1900s is where we're going to pick up and discuss a few things that happened. But what's probably going to happen more now is instead of looking at times and dates and people, we're going to start looking at what happened in the 1900s and ideas and philosophies that got us to where we are today and how the SBC reacted to certain things. And so today we're going to cover a few more of the date things, but we're really going to start looking at starting next week, we're going to start looking at some of the influences, especially things like Darwinism, how that affected the church, because it did. When we start looking at psychology, how it affected the church, because it did. We'll look at modernism and postmodernism and those things that you've probably heard of and talked about. But we're going to look at how they affected the church and how it got us to where we are today. But today we're going to look a lot at just the early 1900s and some of the shifts that happened at the start of the 1900s. And so for Southern Baptists, this was a time of prosperity and goodwill. The early 1900s was a time when things were looking great for Southern Baptists. There was optimism, there was unity, there was strength going on. And from 1899 to 1900, that year, the Home Mission Board saw a 23% increase in giving. That's incredible, okay? We haven't seen that as the SBC probably since, okay? So that kind of an increase shows that there's an increase going on in the Southern Baptist Convention. And in 1904, the Home Mission Board was supporting 616 missionaries and supplied 2,224 churches. So at that point in time, because of the increase and what's really funny is when I'm going to show you a number here, but the dollar was going a little bit further than but what it shows is that in the early 1900s, this is just the 616 missionaries are here in the United States. Now keep in mind that at 1604, Oklahoma is not a state yet, right? So missionaries are going out west, and at this point in time, they're even talking about starting schools in the mountains. So they're looking at Colorado and Wyoming and Utah and, that region hitting the Rocky Mountains at this point in time. And they're supplying over 2,000 churches. 1904, the SBC reported 7,526 new converts, organized 157 churches, built or improved 179 places of worship. So they were, like I said, there's prosperity. We're coming out. We're far past the Civil War. The country is recovering from that. There's unity in that, and so there's this time of prosperity that is going on. Now, here's the question. Who was paying attention last week? Why do you think that is? Exactly. 1903 is the height of a me. Okay? And what are we thinking? They're coming out of the I'm okay, you're okay after the Civil War. Both sides were fine. And then there's the I'm not okay, you're okay kind of thinking as we'll start to swing down. But in the early 1900s, we're at the height of a me, which is usually during the time of the most goodwill and prosperity. That's usually what is happening during those times. And so it makes sense that that's what's going on in the SBC. We're unified. We're coming together. We're starting to you support others, and in churches we start to support missions, and we start to look forward to what's coming. All right, so we'll move on past that because I know you guys were super excited, right? Don't worry, it'll keep coming back as we go through the 1900s. Okay, but here's what we're going to see. The strength of the SBC was found in rural churches. Only in cities like Atlanta, Richmond, and Louisville was the SBC strong in urban areas. So where's the SBC churches? Rural, small towns, country churches. Sound familiar? Yeah, because we're a rural church for now. But that's that. So the strength, and that's where the people are. Okay, that's where they were reaching. That's where people are giving from. That's where the money is coming from. These rural churches down in the South that are giving towards the Home Mission Board. They're reading stories of missionaries. They're giving towards missionaries. People like Lottie Moon that were still active, giving towards them, and other missionaries that are going out into the mission field. And then you also have the missionaries that are going out west that they're really wanting to support. And so the rural churches have come together under this convention, and that is the strength. So the convention decided to spend $25,000 for the next 10 years, each year for the next 10 years, to support new rural ministries. What are they doing with that money? What do you think?
Building some churches, I guess.
Yep. They began to do work in Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, Missouri, and Oklahoma. So the frontier, moving west, this is where they're starting to really focus. They're going to start building churches, supporting missionaries, giving to pastors who are going out there, working on establishing this country and its expansion out west. Okay? So, got a few questions. Do you think that the strength of the SBC is still in the rural churches, or do you think we have shifted to an urban strength? Where do you think we are?
Urban.
You think we're urban? Southern Baptist Convention still urban, is now urban?
I'd say half and half.
Half and half? Okay. So, what is the current plan to grow the SBC in North America?
Urban.
It's urban. Okay. North American Mission Board has targeted 19 cities. And those cities, churches are supposed to plant other churches. And then that's supposed to spill over in the rural. Do you think that's a good plan?
Not really.
Nope. It's a terrible plan. Because as of right now, the SBC strength is still in rural churches. But who do we talk about? Oh, in Oklahoma, who do we talk about? It's Quail Springs Baptist Church. Okay, urban church. Gave, in one lump sum, this is a few years ago, they gave a $3 million check or something like that to the BGCO, or Oklahoma Baptist, because they had more money than they knew what to do with. So they gave, and it got a big write-up in the Messenger, which is fine. Don't get me wrong. I mean, if we had that kind of money, we would probably do it too, right? Say we want to give this money. But nothing's ever said of the millions upon millions of dollars that come out of rural church pockets. Okay? So, it's churches like ours that are still the strength of the SBC. And the plan to take money from rural churches, give it to the urban churches, and that's supposed to spill over, has never worked in history. It's never worked that way. It actually goes the other way, because people from the city don't usually move out into rural areas. But people from rural move into urban areas. Okay? So, that's our current plan, and until I hear otherwise. I have heard some murmurings that they don't think that it's working like it should. And I just want to say, no, sorry, that makes me sound arrogant. But they should have known that was going to happen.
But they had a background to some degree. We went through a period of time where we set up mission churches, where churches would go out and help establish another church, or a fledgling attempt to establish another church, and provide workers, provide materials, provide literature, and have a mission church until it got on its feet.
Right. That's the plan of the 1900s.
Yeah.
Of the early 1900s, yes.
And that's what really kind of stimulated the growth of the rural churches in terms of numbers. We started being able to have small communities or small fowlers would have a church in their local area, as opposed to having to drive 15, 20 miles or whatever to get to a church.
Well, right, but that's kind of the dilemma now. Okay, in the early 1900s, how are people getting around?
A horse.
Yeah, horse and a wagon, or walking to get to church. Okay, now there's no problem with people driving an hour to get to a church. Okay, I know people from this area, talk to them, who drive all the way to Life Church in Edmond, because that's the start of Life Church, is the one in Edmond, the one with the big white cross, right? They have no problem driving that, because transportation is so readily available. And if you miss, you can get it online, right? And you can make your small group, and you might have a small group that meets out here. So those are problems that we'll start to cover as we continue to go into the 1900s. But understand that the original plan was strengthen the urban or the rural churches, and they will strengthen the urban churches. Okay? Now, say if you go to, so this might sound like me venting, which it probably is. Okay? But if you go to a convention that the Oklahoma Baptists are putting on, who are all their speakers? Usually shipped in from Texas, and I've seen guys come all the way from Florida who are pastors of large churches. I'm like, but you're talking to a bunch of rural church pastors, because that's most of the people that go to these what we used to call the evangelism conference and other preaching conferences. And then they tell us that if we're not running 200 people, then we're not doing what God wants us to do. And so, but that's never been the plan of the SBC, right? It started in the early 1900s. We started to strengthen the rural churches by taking and sending out, building churches, supporting pastors, supporting churches, and building them in those rural areas. And then they would strengthen the urban areas because people would spill out of there and go into the urban areas and start churches, and then you could start churches that way. Okay, that was the original plan. So, since I said we're gonna chase a rabbit for just a second. Since I said that they started work in Texas and Arkansas and Oklahoma, I'm going to give you a little bit of our history. So on November 9th, 1906, the Baptist General Convention of Indian Territory held its last session at the First Baptist Church of Shawnee. On the same day, the Oklahoma Baptist State Convention held its final session at the First Methodist Church of Shawnee. At a prearranged time, the two conventions then met, formed a line, marched 2 by 2 through the Shawnee Opera House, and there formed the Baptist General Convention of the state of Oklahoma. So in 1906. In 1904, they start the work in doing this. Okay, so in 1906, these two smaller conventions joined together to form the Baptist General Convention of Oklahoma, which 2 or 3 years ago was renamed to Oklahoma Baptists. So that's our history. We're part of the Oklahoma Baptists, formerly known as the BGCO. And know that the oldest association, does anybody know this one? This is a trick question, not a trick question, but the oldest association in Oklahoma? It is not. It is LaFleur Baptist Association, which is where I was. And the First Baptist Church, this is what I heard when I was there, was Coweta Baptist Church, north of Bocoshi, and I got to preach in there. Just saying. That's what they say. That's what they say. I don't know. Couldn't find that on any of the history. Because the very first Baptist church that I find is Shawnee, as far as, I guess, established Southern Baptist Church. I don't know. But
I'll have to look, because I think there's a reference to that in the Choctaw history. Because when the Choctaws came in the Trail of Tears, Cherokees, and they divided that up, the main influence that the United States was having within the Indian territories was through missionaries and churches that came in to organize and facilitate the folks transplanted here.
right.
And so I'll have to look.
So, yeah, Southern Baptists,
It's not a surprise to me that it's Coweta.
yeah, Southern Baptists have always had an interest in the Indian territories and witnessing and bringing the gospel to Native Americans. But so that's, since we were doing a little bit of history, that's the history according to the web page. That's copied word for word from the web page of the BGCO, or Oklahoma Baptists. So I looked up there, I was like, oh, let's see what since we're talking about Oklahoma just for a minute, we're an Oklahoma church, this affects us. That's what happened in 1906. And to form the Oklahoma Baptist the Baptist General Convention of Oklahoma, which we are a part of. Now, our church doesn't show up for another 60 years, but that's what we're a part of, and that's what, and then that the BGCO is part of the Southern Baptist Convention. Okay, so we'll continue with that. I am going to take we're going to splinter off a little bit and divert from Southern Baptist for a moment. And we're going to talk about the National Baptist Convention because this has kind of come up a little bit in our talk, and I think it's important for us to cover. So in 1895, 3 separate conventions that had been started through various ways joined together to form the National Baptist Convention. Just understand that after the 1800s, where they were talking about, well, are we society? Do we run convention? How do we do that? So these 3 conventions kind of start, much like you saw that there was 2 conventions going for Oklahoma. They weren't part of the Southern Baptist Convention. They were their own separate conventions, and then when they joined together, became part of the Southern Baptist Convention. But so you got these 3, and they come together, they merge, and form the National Baptist Convention. Now, this convention was for black Baptist churches. So that's who they targeted. That's who they said, black churches, they start this convention. So blacks had started to become Christian as slaves during the First Great Awakening. So remember when we covered the First Great Awakening in the 1700s, black people started to become Christians while they were slaves. And slavery was a nationwide thing at that point in time. And many of the early black Christians were born in America, and their African religions were nothing more than ancient stories and superstitions to them, so they embraced Christianity. Okay, so by the time the Great Awakening is happening, a lot of the slaves aren't even from Africa anymore. They were born here. And so the stories and the religions that had been brought over kind of dissipated, and they accepted Christianity. And so, especially during that Great Awakening, they started to embrace Christianity. After the Civil War, many American Baptists, Northern, were reluctant to work in the South, which we talked about. There was conflict there. Remember that the societies were starting to come into the convention, and finally, at gunpoint, they got kicked out. Okay, so they were reluctant to work in the South, and the SBC wasn't seen as an ally to the blacks, although the SBC did have blacks serving on the Home Mission Board. Okay, so remember, many of the pastors, the Baptist pastors, were slave owners, had lands during the South prior to the Civil War. When the Civil War is over, there's still that animosity that it's tougher to make it, because remember, they financially in the South, if you didn't have slaves, you couldn't really make a profit because you needed all those workers to work the cotton gin. Okay? So you couldn't make a profit if you're paying them wages. Whereas in the North, if you remember, working in factories, it's cheaper to pay them wages rather than have them as slaves. Okay, so how that's working, and that's part of the problem of what's going on in the Civil War that sets up the Civil War. Okay, it's financial. As much as we'd like to say, well, it was about slavery, it really wasn't. It was just, that was the issue, right? That we learn about, but a lot of it, and don't get me wrong, slavery is bad, and there should never be a group of people that are said, you are subservient to us because of the color of your skin. That's wrong. Okay, it's not even biblical. But it's political, right? And so you have politics and finances and money that's playing into all of this. So once they're freed and now they have to pay them, the SBC pastors and plantation owners that are faltering, spite whatever you want to call it, they're not really showing favoritism towards the blacks, okay? So the SBC has always been inclusive in the sense that they were working in that mission field, but there's a lot of people that don't want to participate in that, okay? But they are employing in the home mission board. They do have black, and it's not one. They had like 4 or 5 that were part of the home mission board. So, and at that time, that was a lot. Okay, so they're still employing, they're serving, but reaching them when we could be pushing out west or getting the Native Americans, that seemed to be more of the focus rather than evangelizing the blacks, okay? And we can probably see why. So the National Baptist Convention remains to this day as the largest convention of black churches and has recently joined up with another group, and I don't remember, but they still, some of these churches still participate in the SBC. So think of it kind of like this. We participate in the Oklahoma Baptist, BGCO, which is a convention. It's not under or subservient to the Southern Baptist Convention. They're 2 separate conventions, okay? They work together, but the SBC doesn't control the BGCO, okay? And neither one controls us as a church. We cooperate together. We work together. We have joined the BGCO, but we're not owned by them. We're also not owned by the Southern Baptist Convention. Okay, we're an autonomous church. So these black churches, some of them participate in the Southern Baptist Convention, and they participate in the National Baptist Convention. Okay, so if there was one, I remember in Bartlesville they were part of the association up there, but they were the black church. Okay, it was the Baptist. I don't remember the name of it. A good time was had by all, though. Okay. You talk about a different spiritual, experience, I'll tell you. But that's what it was, okay? I'm sure that they probably participate in the National Baptist Convention because we can, okay? So we can, as a church, also participate in other conventions. We don't just have to participate in the Southern Baptist Convention, much like we participate in 2. Well, Baptist Convention and the National or the Southern Baptist Convention. Okay, so I just wanted to cover that a little bit because that's kind of what happened with the black churches. So back to the early 1900s, the SBC soon became a larger, more unified organization as opposed to the Northern American Baptists. So this all takes place in the early 1900s, even becoming 4 times as many by the 1920s. Excuse me, the Northern Baptists, remember there was this conflict, there was this separation, even came to the point of pulling guns, okay, that the SBC put away and said, no, you got to get out, we're doing our own thing. And by the 1920s, so that's 30 years, because that was in, I think, 1895, if I'm remembering right. Okay, so in 30 years, the SBC is 4 times the size of the Northern Baptists. So Northern Baptists started to lose numbers. Now, why do you think that is? So after this, if I ask my wife these questions, she just looks at me and says, the pendulum. Doesn't work. So I know that that's where you're going first now. Why do you think that is? I don't know. That has something to do with the pendulum. So what makes the Southern Baptist Convention set apart than the Northern Baptist counterparts? And even within 30 years, they're 4 times the size after struggling and almost giving up and being taken over by the Northern Baptists again.
Well, I think you've got a population spread.
Okay.
I think that begins to migrate south, migrate west.
Yeah, but the North is really more populated than the South.
It is, but it's also got a larger number of variety of churches and denominations and stuff are present there, established, with a lot of historical background. You've got a lot of immigrants coming, and every town is a Prague. You know, it's a Czechoslovakian community, or it's something else, and they bring that with them a lot. So I think immigration has part of that, and I think that population shift has some of it.
Okay.
Other than the fact that
I don't think you're wrong.
but you're going to be nice about it and tell me that.
But you're not wrong. That's just not part of the reason that historians give. So, one Baptist historian writes this as the reason why the SBC grew exponentially. 1, an early union of Baptist forces to protect themselves against persecution. So Baptists in the past had been persecuted. It was a persecuted denomination. We remember we've gone through that. 1611, the very first Baptist church is started by Thomas Elwes. What happens to him? Sorry for all of you King James Bible users. King James grabs him, throws him in prison where he stays the rest of his life. Okay? Why? Because he dared to pull away from the church. Okay? To pull away from the Anglican church. Baptists in the start of in the very start of the United States, when it was still the colonies, they start establishing churches. What did the Congregationalists do to them? Seized their lands, threw them out. Okay? But early on with the Southern Baptist Convention, what did they do? What was the final thing that split them from the Northern Baptists? I've referenced it twice this talk. They pulled their guns. And they said, nope, we're Americans. We have the right to bear arms. And if you come at us, we're pulling guns. So for Southern Baptists, the persecution kind of stopped. Did it stop up north? For the most part, because Baptists were so influential in the Revolutionary War, getting Constitution started, but there's still that animosity that's going on, they're Baptists. But down south, we're Baptists. All right? So early on, they establish, you can't come at us. We fight back. Well, that's appealing to people. And so as they come together, they're going to defend each other. We're Baptists. We're a Southern Baptist Convention, and they did. Didn't matter that when they pulled their guns, they were from 5 different states. None of that mattered. They were unified. They were ready to work together, and they're not going to allow anyone to come at them, and they're going to stand against persecution. So he cites that early on. They're not taking anything. 2, a general Baptist background with its more centralized polity. So what are the general Baptists? Remember, there was the 2 kind of Baptists. General and particular. What's the difference? Don't have to look away. If you don't know, it's okay.
Looks like it.
Oh, well, I don't know, maybe. Remember, the particular Baptist says there's a particular atonement, that Jesus Christ only died for a select few people. A limited atonement, which is the crux of Calvinism. Limited atonement, okay? The general Baptists say, no, Jesus has died for everyone. There's a general atonement that's out there, okay? What were Southern Baptists when they first started? They're general Baptists. We're going to get into the resurgence of Calvinism that's affecting us even today. Okay, we'll get into that. But they start out as general Baptist background, which don't let anyone tell you Baptists are Calvinists. They're not. They never have been. They've been there. This Calvinism has always sneaked in, has always come in, has always tried to get its hands on it, but it's never been able to completely. Okay? The very first Baptist church, Thomas Elwes, 1611, General Baptist. Anytime those two conventions, they split apart, even though they worked together as Baptists, you still have particular and general, but the particulars died. What happens? They come into the General Baptist and they overtake them. Okay, that happened in history. The Southern Baptist Convention was started as a General Baptist background. Does that mean all the churches were? No, but the majority were, and the majority are. And so don't let anyone tell you that they're not. Had a discussion with a guy a few weeks ago that told me that Baptists are sovereign grace. They're limited atonement. They're not. They never have been. We've always believed in a general atonement. Doesn't mean that all Baptists have, but the conventions, the establishments have usually always started that way, in a general atonement sense. So the General Baptist background, with its centralized polity, which centralizing as a group, as a union, okay, rather than a whole bunch of individual churches, okay, so that you're pulling them together. Okay, number 3, a developing centralization in state conventions quite early in the 19th century. So what did the convention do? It pulled churches together. They weren't separate doing different things. They were coming together under the convention. They were really pulling in unity, and so that's driving the growth. 4, a typical American criticism of the financial basis of representation, which is inherent in the older cooperative society system. Okay, so let's decipher that for a minute. We want taxation with representation. That's what that means. Where does our money go? When we give to a convention, do we not have the right to say, where does our money go? That wasn't happening in the societies. In the societies, you would have to go to all of the different ones, your church, and you wouldn't send a representative. We didn't send messengers. We'll get to that here in a second. You wouldn't send messengers. It's the whole church would go. And so the whole church would have to go up north, and then you might not get a say in where that money is spent. Convention, on the other hand, says, you're going to tell us, and you're going to give us reports, and you're going to give us budgets of where each and every dollar goes. That's been the problem with the North American Mission Board lately. They're not giving us those numbers anymore. And they're telling churches, the North American Mission Board president told a church or an association in Tennessee, look, if you want to know, if you don't want to give, don't give. And they're not releasing the numbers, okay? It's not a perfect system. The convention system is not a perfect system. Just like anything else, people can gain power and want it, okay? But that's been the problem lately, is we're going, hey, where's your money going? And why is it not hitting the mission field? It's really what we're asking. And they won't tell us. Okay? So, there's a lot of that going on. So, but early on, that was the system. What was the Revolutionary War fought over? Taxation without representation. That's what that's saying. We want to know where the money is going. We want to see where it's going. And that wasn't happening in the societies. 5, pressure from the landmarks to substitute a church basis for the financial. Okay, so we're going to get to that here in just a moment, okay? So we're going to talk about that last point for a moment. So we talked about landmarkism and its influence and what had happened in the SBC and Baptists in general. Although the SBC never adopted landmarkism, it did affect how the SBC viewed associations and conventions. So the landmarks had a massive influence on what we do today and how we do things, okay? Because we now send messengers, right? That came out of the landmarks saying, you don't have to send the whole church. Just send a representative. And that's going to make things better. That's going to make business easier rather than having a whole church flood, which also, in that situation, if we think, if Quail Springs Baptist, no, they're not doing this, so I'm not making them the bad guy, I'm just using their numbers. If the largest church in Oklahoma City decided to go to the convention, the BGCO, and say, we want to do this, whatever that is, and all that's going to do is siphon money out of the rural churches and into an urban development, and then we were like, hey, we're going to send our whole church because we're against this, are we going to make a dent? Not if they send their whole church, right? Okay, so the representation, the messenger side of it, we started to use because now we get as much representation as they do. Okay, so that happened out of the messenger system. Okay, so although we never adopted landmarkism, which is more of it's a theology, okay, that they have. Associations used to be churches. Okay, associations used to be churches associating for mutual help. That's what associations were used for. But after the landmarkism came through, but now it seems that churches join an organization regardless of the interest of the churches may have in the organization, which results in many churches getting lost in the larger organization and churches looking to the leaders to speak for them on faith, polity, and morals. Okay, so before landmarkism, we weren't looking to leaders. And now it functions a lot like the Senate and House, the American idea of how do you govern something, okay? Which is the best form of government that's ever been on the face of the earth, okay? We understand that. So now we look to leaders to speak on these things rather than before associations were for mutual help. Because what was happening in the early 1900s? What was the Home Mission Board doing? Taking money, planting churches, paying pastors, building buildings. Do we do that today? We do not. We don't. We have church planners that will get help, but most of the time it's not enough to live off of. Okay? So unless you, and we're not doing those things that the SBC was originally doing. Because now you can have smaller churches that get lost in the larger organization. Okay? And we see that. Okay? I'm not going to tell you who it was, but you get things like this. Okay? So I'm at the convention. I've got my badge on. It says my name and the church, Hillside Baptist Church. Okay? Standing in a circle, talking with a group of people. One of the mega church pastors comes and stands in the group, shakes hands with this guy, shakes hands with this guy, looks at me, sees my name tag, turns around and walks off. Okay? Why? He doesn't know my church. And he knows that looking at the church, not up to his level. Okay? I've met this guy several times. That's all I've always thought of him. But that's beside the point. Okay? But what does that show? Smaller churches can get lost in the larger organization. Okay? If you're not the church that writes a $3 million check, what do they do for you? Well, they'll send you a plaque. And if your baptism numbers are all right, they'll give you an attaboy at the state convention. Right? So that's so because of the kind of the landmarks coming in and the influence, we kind of had this switch over the early 1900s to the middle 1900s of, well, churches were for mutual help, and now we'll just bring you in even if you're not terribly concerned with the overall mission of the convention. Okay, so we have churches that join the convention all the time that just, and then they don't play well with the association or whatever. Okay, they're not about mutual help anymore. It's about the larger organization rather than helping out other individual churches. Not to say that it's not happening. We know that there are some larger churches, city, urban churches that have sent pastors to rural churches and helped get them, rebuild them, revitalize, do those things. I'm not saying it's not happening, but convention life is different than it was in the early 1900s. Okay, so what do you think are some of the contributing factors to the SBC becoming the largest Christian denomination in America? What have you seen? Is there something that we didn't cover or something that stuck out to you like, wow, I didn't know that happened? Or
Well, they put a lot of emphasis on getting out in the community, knocking on doors, that kind of thing. My experience is that many denominations did not or do not do that.
Mm-hmm.
We went through a period of time, probably in the 40s, after the 40s and 50s, where we did that. Evangelism had a different view than what we have now. Church membership, unfortunately, became a status symbol in a lot of ways. If you wanted to be elected to office or whatever, you need to be a member of the church. You went to the largest, most dominant church that you could in the community and all that kind of thing. So we had, we've grown for lots of reasons. Not all of them have been for the best. But I think it would have to do with the evangelism emphasis that is placed on it.
Okay.
They seem to make themselves look like, feel like, and comfortable with me. I can fit in there.
Okay. Yeah.
They don't wear robes. They don't speak in a language.
They don't wear robes here.
Well, they don't wear, that is.
No, that was I never covered that, but back in the Great Awakening, that was one of the biggest controversies of the Baptist churches becoming, the Congregationalist churches becoming Baptist, is they still kept those robes and those ornate decorations and things like that. And that was a big controversy because Baptists are like, hey, we don't do that. We don't wear robes to preach in. Okay? They do back east some.
Well, there was one in Texas that within my lifetime, within the last 30 years, I guess it's been that long, that they had the robes, somebody on the podium, anything to do with the function of that service. What's that?
That was the church that I served in Oklahoma City way back in the and found their clothes. It's like, man, some of them were really ornate. And I was like, if I should come out and preach next time they allow me to preach in one of these. I wonder what that would do. But no, I didn't. You notice I don't even wear a robe to do baptism. So
But it seemed to be that the SBC, maybe not so much in this area or in this community, but as a general statement, for a people's church as opposed to a religious church.
right. A lot of the other denominations were that way. I think you're on it right there. So do you think the convention is a good thing for Baptists and their autonomy, or do you think it takes away from church autonomy? That's the argument, that conventions take away from church autonomy. Because you kind of have a governing body, although they may not. What they say is that, well, you're part of a larger organization, and the church shouldn't have that because the church is completely autonomous, and having a larger organization kind of takes away from that, because if you decide to do something that's outside of what they say, then they can, X you out or put those sort of things, is instead of allowing you to, as a church, to just worship and do the things that you want to do. Because for one, I'll give you for instance, not that we would do this, but if I got up here and I said, we're all going to start speaking in tongues, and we're all going to, say every Sunday, that's what we're doing. And the SBC could come and say, you can't do that here. We're going to disassociate with you instead of giving us the freedom to worship that way if we choose to. Now, I know that's not going to happen because we don't agree with the gift of tongues or the not so gift of tongues. But yeah, we're going to buy a lot.
I don't think it takes away from it. I think it adds to it.
Okay.
Because we can come together and, for the greater good, we can come together and do some amazing things that we couldn't accomplish just our church. Like where they go out and do the relief for the tornadoes or that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah, disaster relief, yeah.
Just as our church, we would not be able to reach other places like that.
Agreed? Yeah.
I kind of agree, and it gives us, and it can go terribly wrong, but it gives us a foundation that we can continue to look back at. I like church autonomy, I want church autonomy, but church autonomy can sometimes become, if you don't do it my way, we're not going to do it, because I give the biggest check.
Okay, yeah.
And then all of a sudden we lose our foundation of faith here. We start dictating things that are autonomous, and we're not even living up to our core values. So I think we need that core value. Now, there are times we're going to not like those core values. We see that in the Baptist Faith and Message. There are some of us that didn't think we needed to add anything to the 1963 Baptist Faith and Message. But yet, as we have to live and exist in this society, there are times we need to address certain issues and establish that in that core value what our stand is going to be. Like it or not, we're going to have to take a look at what do we think about transgender. What do we? What's going to keep us in a like faith and order with the other Baptist churches we want to cooperate with? I think that central convention process has a place there, as long as they agree with me.
I'm not, as long as they, I'm not against that. I actually support convention because like you said, we can do more together than we can do apart. And what gets to me is when we don't see where that money is going, and we're giving millions of dollars, and missionaries are coming off the field. We're not funding. We're losing missionaries on the field. Our churches are shrinking. We need to start rethinking how we're spending that money. We need to start rethinking the strategy. So in that sense, the convention can be a hindrance because they can get stuck in their ways. And this is what we're going to do. We've done it this way for a long time. We're going to continue, rather than saying, hey, maybe we need to pull back and think of something new to do with it. Especially when we're seeing, why are we looking at communities like ours, and the convention goes, well, we need to put a church out there because the church that's there they're not running the number of people that they should be. So they plant another church instead of coming alongside and saying, how can we help you? How can we revitalize your church? Or how can we say, but once again, that comes back to church autonomy. Would we want another church from the city coming in here and saying, hey, this is how you're going to do something. Okay, this is how you're going to do it. Okay, unless we wanted that help. But we're doing that. We're planting churches on top of other churches and saying this. So this is their line where they're saying, this is with the BGCO, okay? Or this is with the North American Mission Board. If we were to double our number overnight, we don't have enough seats to sit all the people, which is a true statement. Okay, we don't. If we were to just increase double like that, okay, there's not enough seats in churches to support that amount of people. So we have to build churches in the same area. But all that's doing is it's killing one church. Okay? You're trading fish.
Or just build this church up.
Right. That would be great. Sure, let's that's our next goal. We're building a balcony, okay? When we build out here, there's a balcony. Jim's like, I don't think I'm going to be here. All right, we got one more question. Do you think that the SBC churches have relied too much on their convention leaders to speak for them on a national scale?
Who else is going to speak? Who's the media going to go to? They're going to come out here and ask you what we think about something, or are they going to go to someone who is the big dog? I don't want to be the big dog.
If our convention leaders should support our line of thinking, and I assume they're elected to those positions.
By our messengers, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So they should represent us. I'm not saying they probably always do, but yeah, they should speak for us because they should represent us. They should be representing what we think and believe and want and need and whatever. They should.
Should.
Just like our president should.
He should.
Should.
Yeah.
Past time. Let's go.
No, I agree. But it's that we need to, I believe that I think it's time for the rural churches to start participating more in the convention. Because I think that rural churches are losing their voice. Because when was the last time a church of 100 people, their pastor or somebody that they supported, got elected to the SBC president?
First Baptist Church of Tallahassee had 2 presidents of the Baptist General Convention, and a guy by the name of Haskins rose from the pastorate of that church to be the leader of this thing that Adela went to, this pastoral.
Yeah, the Haskins. Yeah, the Haskins school.
I preached out here at this church and did my ordination.
But how long ago?
That's been a long time ago. I agree. What I'm saying is, 50 years ago, that was happening. The rural churches did have a vote in things like that, and were led by pastors from Anadarko or Tallahassee or even Broken Arrow, when it wasn't what Broken Arrow is now.
Broken Arrow's a big city, Jim.
Well, I know it is now, but it wasn't always that.
First Baptist Church, Broken Arrow's a big church, Jim.
I know it is. It wasn't always that way.
Wasn't always, yeah. But, yeah, so that's hundreds. And what happened, this is when we can really start to see the decisions that have been made in the last 100 years we're really dealing with today. We can see how it even affects us today, and I even affected this church individually, as just this church, in some of the things that they believed and some of the things that they put forward. I know that I've talked with people that from this church that have some of those views. Landmarkism. See, I get the benefit of I wasn't raised Baptist. So I came into this with a whole different set and said, okay, well, what does Southern Baptist believe? And then I was told what Southern Baptists believe by going to a Southern Baptist church in Bartlesville, and learning theologically where we stood, and didn't learn the history of what had happened to get us to where we are. Those views, I didn't know. I mean, I grew up in a legalistic church. I guess that's kind of landmarkism, but they didn't call it that in the Wesleyan church. You just kind of call it legalism, which I went, I don't want to be a part of that. And Southern Baptist, or at least the church that I went to in Bartlesville, didn't seem to have any of that going on. So I get to look at all this with fresh eyes. And so it's been really interesting looking at our history, and we'll continue. And I hope that it's been interesting to you and will continue to be interesting, although we are getting towards the end, okay? Because you know me, I can cover 100 years in one session, or I can take 10. We'll just play it by 80. Oh yeah, it's 80, but we're starting the 1900s, so we've got 120 to go. So that's all right. Well, we'll pray and then be dismissed. God, we thank you for all that you do for us. We thank you for